Hello friends, it is day 7 of our reset. Today we're going to be looking at Luke 4 verses 16 through 32. If you haven't read these passages yet, pause the video and come back when you've read them. So these folks get real mad at Jesus. And on first reading, it's not exactly clear why, but as we kept reading a few more times and thought about who these people were, it began to make a little more sense. These were Jews living under Roman occupation. So they were a conquered, subjugated, and oppressed people by a huge military power. And so when Jesus says things like, good news to the poor, liberty to the captives and the oppressed, they would have been going, yes, that's the stuff we like. And then they get mad and they try and kill him. Why? Jesus references Elijah and Elisha. I want to take these stories and put them into terms that we might be a little more familiar with. It's as if Jesus said, remember the famine in 1900? Well, there were plenty of Adventists who really needed help during that time, but God didn't send Ellen White to any of them. God only sent Ellen White to a devout Roman Catholic immigrant. Or remember the coronavirus of 2020? Well, there were plenty of Adventists who really needed help during that time, but God didn't send ADRA to any of them. ADRA was only sent to a group of devout Muslims in the Middle East. That makes us a little bit uncomfortable, and that is just a fraction of what these Jews would have felt. This was incredibly offensive to them. This was challenging their status as a special people of God. This is a theme that is repeated over and over by Jesus. Jesus includes the excluded, and he challenges the inclusion status of the people who excluded them. And it goes further because Jesus references people who had conquered Israel. Jesus is essentially saying, hey, this good news, it's for the Romans too. They're captives to sin just like you are. The boundaries that you drew, they're too small. And that's an offensive idea. You see, grace is great when it's for me and my people. But I start to question it when it is offered to my enemy. I mean, maybe if my enemy changes and becomes more like me, more like us, then grace can be offered. And yet, the people I hate, God looks at and says, you are my beloved child, and I'm so pleased with you. Think about that. God looks at Democrats, and God looks at Republicans, and God says, you are my beloved child. I'm so pleased with you. God looks at Donald Trump, and God looks at Barack Obama, and says, you are my beloved child. I'm so pleased with you. And those are actually good examples because we don't know them personally, and so it's easy to hate them because they're more ideas in our head than actual people. And understand, it's not if they change and become more like what we think people ought to be, then God can be pleased with them. No, because if grace isn't big enough for them at their worst, then grace isn't big enough for me at mine. We're going to spend 2 days on this topic because the next 12 sections in Luke deal with this very thing. Jesus challenging the lines that we draw to include people who, in our scheme of what the good news really is. So as you go about your quarantine today, think about where you have drawn your circle of inclusion. Who have you left out of God's favor? And ponder the simple fact that God looks at that person and says, you are my beloved child. I am so pleased with you. May God bless you and keep you. May the face of Jesus shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the fullness of the Spirit dwell within you and give you peace.